The Last Journey. Chapter 2.
When we arrived at the Western United System Federation, I called Admiral Kellor. I informed her of our location, and she sent the coordinates for our teleporter to transfer T-Vass and me to meet the admirals. I told T-Vass to wear her admiral uniform, as would I. They were surprised and a little confused when they saw us.
David, who is this with you?
I told them she was my wife and Stella had succumbed to pancreatic cancer. I let T-Vass tell them about our search and loss, about obtaining the AC3 cure for cancer, and she offered them the cure. I told them about losing my admiral, our adventures with Admiral Yellowtooth and the Archons, the trouble getting the AC3 cure, and all our adventures pulling people, ships, and airplanes out of the wormhole. About the pirates we had found, the female sex slaves, and so much more. We spent hours recounting our activities and listening to their adventures. They had discovered an intergalactic smuggling ring, fought a battle with pirates, and rescued many stranded spacers in a Sargasso region of space. They also told us about meeting Armin Sigmatog. They had met a ship about midway to the galactic center. It turns out that while we were racing to rejoin our fleet from the center of the galaxy right after we had left Armin Sigmatog's ship in our wake, the Western Systems Enterprise had encountered the Armand, had become acquainted and had made a pact with them. All in all, the time with our friends from the Western United System was enjoyable and informative. We were about to depart when Tal called out,
"Captain, Admiral Kellor for you."
On screen. As I looked, Fleet Admiral Kellor said,
"David, we have seen something unusual on our sensors. Break orbit, but stand by until we can determine just what it is."
Aye aye sir. Barbara, break orbit, take us out about 100 kilometers, and all stop. She replied,
Aye aye, Captain.
So she did as I ordered, and we waited. Suddenly, a fleet of about 200 ships appeared on our sensors, their weapons energized, racing directly for the United System Federation's central headquarters. I ordered, "Tal, get the Admiral on the comm." "Admiral, a fleet of about 200 dreadnought-sized ships are approaching, weapons hot." He replied,
"Got you. I'm on it."
Then just as suddenly, the fleet came to a halt, dissolved into a single ship with no weapons powered up. Tal called,
"Captain, the Admiral again."
"David, it's only a friend, Captain Gregory Jones, a real practical joker. Please re-establish orbit."
"Barb, you heard the Admiral." So she re-established orbit, and the Admiral invited T-Sun, T-Vass, and me down to meet this joker. The Admiral introduced us.
"Greg, this is Admiral David Stevens and his wife Admiral T-Vass. David, you'll have to introduce us to the commander."
"This is my first officer, Commander T-Sun Peterson." I looked at T-Sun with a questioning expression, and she smiled the biggest smile I have ever seen and nodded her head, responding,
"I'm thrilled to meet you, Admiral." "Admiral."
Nodding to Jana.
"And Captain Jones."
Captain Jones looked at the two ladies he had been introduced to and said,
"Admiral Stevens, I must say that if the lovely ladies are any indication of the women in your federation, I'm going to transfer to your navy. You two ladies are gorgeous."
Both held up their left hand and said,
We are married.
Captain Jones faked a crestfallen expression and then laughed.
"So am I. My wife is my first officer."
During my conversation with Captain Jones, I asked him how he generated the fleet, and he told me that he was told how to generate a very realistic hologram in the space around him. Then I asked him who told him how to do that, and he said that a ship's captain from the Krill Empire had told him how. I told the good captain that my escort team had originated the technology to project such a fleet. The Krill got the technology from us, but you have it now, and the rest of the galaxy probably has the technology as well. One advantage down the toilet. We visited over several days while my crew took shore leave and mingled with the citizens of the Western Federation. At the end of our visit, I said, "Well, Admiral, Jana, it has been a good reunion, calm seas and fair winds." Jana responded,
"Calm seas, David, first to sun."
The Fleet Admiral responded,
"Calm seas. David, you may call me Killer. I believe our friendship is that good."
I stuck out my hand, "Thank you, sir." "Killer. Our friendship is that good. I hope to stop by on our way home if that would be okay with you." The two admirals replied,
"We should hope so."
"We should hope so."
And we took our leave of our friends and continued our journey. We came across Admiral Calfram's fleet from the Empire of Sorn as we traveled. We had a brief reunion and continued on our way. As we parted, I heard,
"Calm seas and fair winds, Captain."
and I responded, "Calm seas, Admiral." I was becoming anxious to see Sorge again. She had been a lady, a 10 on a scale of 10, absolutely gorgeous. Not that I was enamored with her, she had been in my head for days to help us rescue their civilization, but she was beautiful. I remember the day I first saw her, the events and conversations were in my mind as the day of the events. O'Reilly called me.
"Captain, you're going to have a visitor. I'll escort her to your ready room."
A few moments later, my annunciator sounded, "Come." I replied. The door opened, and Captain O'Reilly and a stunning young lady stepped in. O'Reilly said,
"Captain, I would like you to meet Serge."
I took a second look. "You are the one who has been in my head?" Sorge replied.
"Yes, Captain. I came to thank you. Oh, and don't worry, I won't tell any secrets."
And I said, "Thank you." It could have happened yesterday, it was so clear to me. I honestly anticipated, with great relish, a reunion with Sorge and the citizens of her world. Of course, we descended into the well of safety surrounded by deadly radiation. Our descent was slow, cautious, and tiring. But we did arrive, only to be challenged.
"Unknown ship, identify yourself."
I ordered tall, "Tell them who we are, please." From the comm came,
USS Constitution? Captain David Stevens?
I replied, "Captain David Stevens, I." I heard many voices from the comm, loud voices, confused voices, then,
"Captain, please establish orbit. Our president awaits you and your crew. I'm sending you the coordinates for your reception. Please teleport down at 1800 your time."
I shrugged it off and agreed to the time and place. 10 minutes later, Tall called out,
"Captain, on screen."
I looked, and there I saw Sorge. She was still beautiful, older, but time had been very kind to her.
"David, may I come aboard?"
Eagerly I agreed and asked the teleporter to bring her aboard. I went to the teleporter to await her arrival. I asked T-Vass and T-Sun to come with me to greet the person who had the curiosity and guts to try to communicate with us and help solve the death pulse. When she arrived, T-Vass glared at me, and mouthed,
This woman was in your head?
I could only nod, yes. Sorge jumped off the dais and hugged me, then asked about Stella. I told her that Stella was dead. Then I introduced her to T-Vass and T-Sun. "Sorge, this is T-Vass, my wife and our ship's surgeon. And this is T-Sun, my first officer." Finally, I turned to my two shipmates. "Ladies, this is Sorge, the one who had the curiosity and the courage to try to communicate with us and was instrumental in our finding the cure for the death pulse." T-Sun extended her hand and welcomed Sorge. T-Vass, on the other hand, was reticent but shook her hand as well. Later, I learned that T-Vass was jealous of Sorge, having been in my head. We visited for a while, then I was called away. Later, I found out that T-Vass asked about Sorge's having been in my head. Sorge replied,
"I made a promise to your husband, Captain Stevens, and to the whole crew of the Constitution never to divulge anything I learned while in their heads. So I have never said anything to anyone, and I will take their secrets to my grave."
Later, in our cabin, T-Vass asked,
Are you attracted to that Sorge woman?
I replied, "I am attracted to only one woman, and that woman is sitting on our bed staring at me." Then, she smiled.
I guess I'm a little insecure seeing that Sorge is so beautiful.
"She is beautiful, but I'm in love with my wife and will never look at another woman as long as my wife is my wife. That's the way it has always been, and that's the way it will always be." Finally, she asked,
David, is there some secret about you she knows I should know?
I did something right after graduating from high school 500 years ago that would be embarrassing, but it concerns no one today. Now, let's talk about something else. During our talks with the people of Sorge's world, we discovered that they called their world Thanatos, after their god. Now we had a name to identify their world. The crew of the Constitution was wined and dined, considered conquering heroes, and treated as honored guests. My visit with the president was pleasant, and we were offered many things, all of which we refused to take, but one honor was offered, which we took with humble grace. We were made citizens of Thanatos. The vital statistics of every crewman were taken and registered in the government's Bureau of Vital Statistics, all crew members aboard the ship when the planet was freed, and all members aboard the ship at present. I said, Mr. President, and people of the world of Thanatos, this is the greatest honor you could ever have given the crew of the USS Constitution. It humbles me to accept this honor for my crew and myself. We were not given time to really get to know you and your people. May your deity bless and keep you safe and prosperous. From the very bottom of my heart, thank you and the citizens of our world. Our mission was simple, to forge a treaty and a free trade agreement with Thanatos, which I hammered out with the Ministry of Trade. They eagerly agreed to our request but were shrewd in their negotiations. However, we did forge an acceptable agreement with a promise that it would be presented to the government of the United System Federation as soon as possible. In addition, communication links were set up via hyperspace transmission to cement our mutual friendship. A local spaceship's captain said to me,
"If you want to see a very different civilization, you should visit the planet of Slomeria. The people there are the only silicon-based life forms I had ever met."
He gave me the key to understanding their language and their location. He provided us with the relevant star chart to locate Slomeria. This was an adventure I just might want to look into. Sorge introduced us to her husband, and T. Vass and I spent many hours with them, talking, playing, and sightseeing. We actually learned their language, rudimentary as it was, and spoke what we could while we were with them. T's son and Hank were wined and dined, as were all my crewmen. Then, sadly, it came time to go home. We were sent off in spectacular fashion, with crowds, fireworks, speeches, and finally, with tears, we left our friends to return home. We sent the text of the mutual trade agreement to Admiral Self and awaited their decision on it. The answer came in 2 days, complete agreement. We presented the signed agreement to the Thanatos Ion Council, received the completed document, and transmitted it to Earth, mission accomplished. As we ascended out of the radiation hole, we received a text from the Chief of Naval Operations.
USS Constitution, you are to visit the Krill Home World in response to Negotiator Sheila's request. Subject: Mutual Trade Agreement and Mutual Defense Treaty. Parameters will be transmitted under separate cover, Self.
I told my first officer, I guess we will just have to put off visiting the Slumerians. Number 1, to the Krill Home World, UL-16. She nodded her head.
Aye, Captain.
T. Vass had given the AC-3 cure to the Krill, and we were to discover that the Krill had developed a substantial improvement in manufacturing the cure and had improved the effectiveness using lower doses. This was one of their main bargaining issues. We arrived at the Krill Home World and contacted Negotiator Sheila. We teleported down and met her at her home. She greeted us, caressed our hands, and said,
"Captain David, I just used the excuse for negotiating a treaty and agreement to see you again. I want you to meet my mate. T. Vass, I haven't known you as long as I have known Captain David, but you are his mate, and I wanted to include such an important creature in his life."
I caressed her appendage and replied, "I would be very interested in meeting your mate. Carter was a good man, and you could only choose such a man again." She had started when I used the word man, so I added, I only meant that Carter had the positive attributes that our society would attribute to a real man. Strength of character, courage, loyalty, and determination. She nodded.
"Like you, Captain David."
I caressed her appendage. "Thank you, my dear friend." She asked us to accompany her, and we went to what seemed like a coal mine. We descended into the mine, into a gallery. Apparently, it was meal time, and she led us over to a table and introduced us to a male Krill.
"Captain David, T. Vass, this is Mina Kelly. Kelly, this is Captain David and Dr. T. Vass. Kelly is my mate."
Sheila grimaced, an expression I had come to know as a smile, and she slid in beside Kelly. He motioned that we should sit across from them. I touched his appendage, as did T. Vass, and said,
"Kelly, how is it that you and Sheila have bonded?"
He thought a moment, then he haltingly spoke.
"We both had lost our mate. You know how Carter died. My mate was killed by an accident at her workplace. I do not know the word in your language. She took care of the sick and injured. We were both very lonely, and we were introduced to each other by a mutual friend, and we seemed to be compatible. We will soon be in the time of. I do not know the words."
Sheila interrupted.
The time of. I will lay my eggs, he will fertilize them, and we shall have our offspring. Our word for this has no human words.
I replied, there are words, but T. Vass and I just do not know what those words are. Is this a time of joy? Both of them nodded enthusiastically. Yes, it is a time of great joy. T. Vass said.
Then let's just call it the time of joy.
We spent lunchtime talking. Then Kelly had to return to work. As he left, he said,
Will I meet you tonight?
T. Vass and I assured him that we would meet later. I caressed Sheila's appendage and asked, Are you happy, dear friend? She replied,
Yes, I am so very happy. He is gentle, kind, attentive, strong, and very pleasing to my eyes.
I asked, What about strength of character, courage, loyalty, and determination? She smiled.
He has demonstrated such traits.
Then T. Vass said,
In that case, we are very happy for you and Kelly.
I replied, Now, about the negotiations? She replied,
The Council has given me free rein to negotiate a trade agreement and mutual defense treaty. So, here it is. I just wanted to see you so much that I contrived this to lure you here.
She handed me a copy of the agreement and the treaty for me to review and negotiate. I promised to read through them and that I would meet with her after I had them so that we could talk. I looked at the documents she had given me. Sheila, why did you wish to see me so much? She looked at me and replied,
Because I love you. You have been such a good friend that I love you.
She hastened to continue.
Not romantic love, friendship love.
I caressed her appendage. Sheila, I have grown to consider you a very special friend. I understand your feelings, and be assured that I love you, too. Our friendship was forged in the fires of battle and adversity. It will last forever. She caressed my hand and whispered,
Captain David, forever. I only wish my dear friend Stella were here too.
And she began to have drops of a liquid falling from her eyes, and I teared up as well. The trade agreement and the mutual defense treaty were written in very simple terms, with no ultra-legal jargon, just straightforward English wording. There was nothing I could or would add or subtract. I was sure the government lawyers and politicians would screw it up, but my job was done. I transmitted the agreement and treaty to Admiral Self with my favorable agreement and told him we would await the government's answer. I found out later that John had taken the agreement and the treaty directly to the President of the United System Federation, and he approved both by executive order. I was floored. It was too simple. I informed negotiator Sheila of the President's order, and she replied that we have a trade agreement and a mutual defense treaty. Then she asked,
Captain David, may I name one of my male offspring David and one of my female offspring Stella? And another female, T. Vass.
I replied, Friend Sheila, of course, we would be honored. Our mission has been accomplished, and we must continue our journey. But when your offspring hatch, I want to know and come and meet them all. She teared up and said, in a shaky voice,
Goodbye, Captain David. I will let you know when my eggs hatch.
I did return when her eggs hatched, and I was introduced to them.
Captain David, this is my son, Pilot David, and my daughters, Negotiator Stella and Hila T. Vass.
They were small images of Miner Kelly and Negotiator Sheila. I dropped to my knees, took the three into my arms, and wished them a happy, successful life. I caressed their appendages and then kissed their foreheads. Sheila also introduced me to her 140 hatchlings, not by name but in mass. We left, and I asked John whether we could detour to visit the silicon-based civilization at Slamerians.
Still, he sent us on to meet with Admiral Yellowtooth to formally establish relations with Flyzina, a trade agreement, and a mutual defense treaty. Number 1, Flyzina, UL-16. We get to see the good Admiral again. She replied.
Aye, Captain.
Smiling, she ordered.
Hank, you heard the captain. Barbara, let's do it. Execute.
I stood and smiled at T-Sun. I was proud of her. She was shaping up like all my past first officers had done. That evening, T. Vass asked,
David, how do you really feel about all the female crewmen aboard? Does it bother you?
I replied, no. I learned 5 centuries ago that I would have to accomplish my mission with what the Army, now the Navy, assigned to me. Every female crewman has proven that they are good at their jobs, hardworking, loyal, and courageous. I wouldn't trade one of them for any other spaceman. This is why I have assigned 3 female commanders to be my first officers and 3 male commanders to be my first officers. Beverly, Tasha, and T's son were as good as John, Larry, and Joel in accomplishing the job. I'm damn proud of all 6. When T's son is promoted, Barbara just might be my next choice.